I'm Lucy. I'm a member of Counterfire. No expert on the Spanish Civil War, but I did do lots of reading, so don't ask me any too difficult questions. I want to talk today about the Spanish Civil War and, the context behind it, why it happened, and a little bit of analysis of, I guess, what went wrong, in my view at least. And hopefully out of today we can get a good understanding of why the Spanish Civil War was an immensely important historical moment, and also remains to be incredibly important 90 years on. It started 90 years ago on Friday. So Spain, sort of at the turn of the century, was one of the largest empires in the world, and it was made incredibly wealthy, as we all know, by this empire. In 1898, it loses the last of its colonies and kind of has to reckon with the loss of this empire and the status associated with it. And the following 10 years or so were kind of turbulent. And in the 1910s, Spain reestablishes a colony, Morocco, in North Africa. It's a largely agricultural economy at the time. Outside of the big cities, mainly Barcelona, the Industrial Revolution has not had the same effect in Spain as it has in other places. It's still capitalist, it's not a feudalist country, but it is incredibly agricultural. In World War I, Spain's neutral, and its industrial heartlands in Catalonia, like Barcelona, did really well trading with the rest of Europe, because it didn't obviously get involved in the war. And there was a boom, an economic boom that unfortunately was then undermined by a war with the colonized Rif people in Morocco. And as this war is underway, a man called Miguel Primo de Rivera launches a 7-year-long dictatorship from 1923 to 1930, and he's supported by the then king Alfonso XIII. And in this time, it's kind of turbulent. By 1931, he's resigned. The Spanish Second Republic is formed. Alfonso XIII abdicates and goes into exile. There's an election in 1931, and the government that's voted in is a kind of broadly liberal one. It's led by a right-wing president and a left-wing prime minister, Miguel Esanya, who we'll come back to later. And they introduce a sort of a variety of pretty tame reforms that, kind of make him slightly popular with the workers, but, doesn't really do anything to undermine the capitalist class in Spain at the time. There's no kind of unemployment relief for workers. And he doesn't do anything to kind of curtail the right-wing reactionary army officers that form most of the army at the time. There's another general election a few years later where the Spanish Confederation of Autonomous Right-Wing Groups, or the CEDA, wins a majority. At the time, the leader of the CEDA is a monarchist, so the president can't have him form a government, and invites a party called the Radical Party to form a government. And what follows are 2 incredibly violent years. They're called the Bienio Negro in Spanish, the 2 black years. There's incredible violence. Between the left and right, there's a fascist party, the Falange, that are incredibly violent, and a violent state repression of the left. So as a response to this, and this is quite important, the UGT, which is the General Union of Workers, and the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, not the same Socialist Workers' Party that we know today, they call a general strike for October 1934, which turns into an armed uprising in Asturias, which is a state on the northern coast of Spain. And this uprising, this commune, is really brutally suppressed. It fails for political reasons, but the key thing is it's really brutally suppressed by Moroccan soldiers in the Spanish Republican Army, led by a man called Francisco Franco, which is important. And there's another general election a few years later, after all this kind of unrest, and the Popular Front, led this time by Miguel Esanya, win. And the Popular Front is a kind of broad, united, in the loosest possible definition of the word, front made out of various different factions on the left, right? Esanya again leads a kind of liberal, not exactly pro-worker government, breaking up strikes, breaking up workers' meetings. And more or less the only thing that the Popular Front agrees on is that the growing fascist movement and the right-wing movement has to be stopped. How exactly this could be done is contested. And the Popular Front is made up of PSOE, the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, the Communist Party, various bourgeois, vaguely left parties, bourgeois nationalist parties from Galicia, Catalonia, And then there's the more left-wing flank of it, the UGT, the anarchists, the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, the POUM, which is an anti-Stalinist Marxist party, are also kind of making up the left flank of it. And I think there were some smaller Trotskyist groups as well. Meanwhile, the right is very unhappy with the reforms introduced by the Republican government, and the right is almost as broad and scattered as the left. And the key players on the right, which we'll come back to probably a few times in this talk, the SEDA mentioned earlier, the liberal kind of right, sort of liberal in a liberal use of the word, the monarchists who support the abdicated Alfonso, but there's also other monarchists who support, they're called Carlists, and they support a different hereditary line of the Spanish government. They're incredibly right-wing. The Catholic Church at the time is, I think, the biggest landowner in Spain. It's incredibly conservative. You have the Falange, which is a fascist party founded by Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera, who's the son of the former dictator. And the Falange is, very popular amongst young men. It's incredibly violent and engages in street fights with the left reasonably often. And finally, you have the army generals. There's 4 army generals, one of whom's already tried to lead a coup in 1932, and who are incredibly reactionary, incredibly right-wing, incredibly unhappy with the Spanish Second Republican government. You have Emilio Mola, Jose Sanjurjo, who is, he's the one who tried to launch a coup already, Jose Quiepo de Llano, and Francisco Franco. And the right is growing, the army officers are becoming more popular and more powerful, so the Republic tries to break them all up by sending the leaders away. So Mola is sent to Pamplona, which is where they do the running of the bulls. Franco is shipped off to the Canary Islands. All of this in an attempt to stop what they know is the coming coup. But on the 13th of July, 1936, a nationalist, former minister under Miguel Primo de Rivera is murdered by a group of police officers with really spurious links to the PSOE. But this is, however spurious these links, this is an appropriate pretext for Mola, Franco, Sanjurjo, and Quiepo de Llano and their allies to launch a military coup, which starts on the 17th of July, 1936. Emilio Mola and Franco begin their coup. Mola in the north of Spain, and Franco, having travelled from the Canary Islands, launches a coup in the north of Africa in the Moroccan colony. The third conspirator, Jose Sanjurjo, who is supposed to be the next leader of Spain under the coup plans, is travelling from his exile in Portugal, but his plane crashes, I suppose luckily, and he dies before he can get to Spain. And there's a kind of aside, it's quite funny, but the plane crashes, is supposed to be because of the sheer amount of luggage he insisted on carrying with him. And he's told by the pilot that the plane is overloaded, and he replies, "I need to wear proper clothes as a new caudillo of Spain." And that kills him, which I think is quite funny. So the coup takes various cities. Franco is in charge of the Spanish colony in North Africa, but crucially, Madrid, Barcelona, and other major cities stay in Republican control because of the huge working class fight back against the coup. Sanjurjo's death is a major blow, and the nationalists are kind of leaderless for a short amount of time. Franco, meanwhile, is stuck in Morocco because while the army has largely gone over to the nationalist side, the Francoist side, the navy has stayed firmly. Most of the navy has stayed on the Republican side. Most of the navy is loyalists. So for a while, Franco's kind of stuck in Morocco, but luckily his allies, Mussolini and Hitler, send over help and fly him over to Spain. And what follows is a really, really brutal civil war. Okay, no one really knows how many people died. It's sort of variously put at somewhere between 1 million and 250,000 people. Franco had about between 150,000 and 200,000 people just massacred. And by 1939, 3 years later, he declares victory over the Republican side and launches a really brutal dictatorship over Spain where, workers are oppressed. All the rights won by workers under the Republic are undone. Women are repressed. National languages are almost sort of wiped out, and and it doesn't end until 40 years later, 1975, when Franco dies. So that's kind of the context. Hopefully, I was assuming most people would know some of the context behind the Spanish Civil War, but I want to talk a little bit now about the political analysis, why I think the Republican side lost, maybe the mistakes they made, which were many, and I suppose what we can learn from it. So if we go back to July 1936, rumours of this planned coup have been circulating for quite a while amongst the workers. And the Republican government is also really aware of the coup, but doesn't act against it, right? They're really nervous about the prospect of a working class uprising like they have had in the past. Should they take decisive action to stop the coup, like, warning the workers that the fascists are on their way or the nationalists are on their way, or arming them because they thought revolution might be around the corner. So the government, they censor the press in the lead up to the coup. The day before the coup, there were blank spaces in the working class newspapers that had warned of a coming military coup, which I think is absolutely despicable. And the day after the murder of the Republican minister by the sort of vaguely socialist police, the government closes working class union and party headquarters, so working class people can't meet. Because the last thing the Republican government, even though it's ostensibly left-wing, want to happen is for workers to arm themselves, even if this is in defence of the Republic against a fascistic military coup. So I'm going to read you a brief quote from this book by Felix Moreau, of a statement that the Republican government put out urging workers to stay calm. They said, the government acknowledges the offers of support which it's received from the workers' organisations, and while being grateful for them, declares that the best aid that can be given to the government is to guarantee the normality of daily life in order to set a high example of serenity and of confidence in the means of the military strength in the state. So while the workers are kind of freaking out, saying, oh God, Franco's on his way, the government's saying, don't worry guys, just support us and it'll all be fine. Luckily, many workers completely ignored this and did arm themselves. The fight back against the coup was kind of almost immediately out of the government's control, right? So army barracks were attacked before the soldiers inside could join the coup. In Barcelona, for instance, workers attacked army barracks with no arms, no weapons, but they attacked army barracks for their guns on the 19th of July, and by 2 p.m. the next day, they controlled the entire city. In response to the coup, the CNT and the UGT, the two biggest unions, called a general strike for the 19th to the 23rd of July, and during which more trade unionists attacked military arsenals for arms. And the workers are growing stronger and stronger during this time, right? Workers' councils are set up, factories and businesses are pulled into worker control. The state effectively loses control of a number of cities. Workers take over Madrid, the whole of Catalonia. In Catalonia, after the revolution, about 75% of the economy is under worker control. Communes, workers' militias emerge. And in Catalonia, actually, it's quite a wide-ranging revolutionary moment. Women, for the first time, allowed access to abortions. Free love becomes normalised. And it's not quite the cultural and social revolution of the Russian Revolution, but it's certainly important because most of Spain is incredibly conservative. One thing workers do fail to do is take control of the banks, which remain under the government's control. So they've not totally overthrown capitalism, but they are incredibly powerful. And kind of at the helm of this, vaguely leading it, are the CNT-FAI, which is the CNT Union and the Anarchist Federation of Iberia, and the socialists in the POUM, right? But crucially, there's no revolutionary party to lead them, right? Despite the rise of you have dual power, where on one side you have the Republican government and then you have the strength of the proletariat. There's no revolutionary party that can stand up to this government, as Russia had, right, with the Bolsheviks. And the weakness of the anarchists, which are the main force in this workers' uprising, is that all these various, the workers' councils, the militias, and so on, were really disjointed. They were local. There was no national committee. There was nothing at the top of all this local workers' rule to kind of lead them all. And apart from, all they had was a really antagonistic Republican government. So as a result of this, the leadership of the CNT and the POUM went into kind of uneasy coalitions with the government, which will cause huge problems later. And certain factions that make up the Republican government and the Popular Front are very much less thrilled about this revolution. And towards the end of 1936, almost from the beginning, but especially towards the end of that year, the cracks begin to emerge more and more pressure is put on the CNT and the POUM, which has disastrous consequences. So After this revolution, Catalonia is fully controlled by the workers. Madrid is as well. They're incredibly powerful across Spain. You're kind of in a situation of dual power, with the workers are insisting on taking control, but the bourgeois state and its supporters insist on maintaining it, with this uneasy coalition kind of forming out of it, right? And at first things are smooth. The government doesn't support the revolution, doesn't entirely try and stop it. It makes a few kind of concessions to it. It introduces people's courts. I think it redistributes some land. But on the other side of the government, you have the Communist Party, which has a lot of influence. The Spanish Communist Party has an awful lot of influence due to its links to the USSR and Stalin. And at the time, while Franco's side is receiving loads of support, sort of covertly, right, from Germany and Italy, the largest provider of aid to the Republican cause and offering support with loads of strings attached is the USSR. But it doesn't believe in this revolution and kind of says that the war has to be won before this revolution can take place, even though the revolution's kind of already happened. The reasoning from the Communist Party is that the revolution can't work until after Franco is defeated. They say, finish Franco first and then make a revolution. And because of this, it kind of sides really firmly with the Republican bourgeois parties, which previously it's called social fascist. It's kind of done a U-turn and said that it needs to make links with the liberals, right? But they're scared of scaring the liberal elements over to the fascist side. The POUM and the CNT and other revolutionaries saw right through this position of Franco, down with Franco first and then do a revolution. And they saw class war as an absolutely crucial part of fighting the nationalists. And the proletariat had only been, so successful in defeating the military in so many places because of this revolutionary impulse it had been building for years, and not because it was concerned with defending the bourgeois republic. It was concerned with defending itself. And this bourgeois republic, by the way, had brutally suppressed a revolutionary uprising in Asturias only a few years previously. On the one hand, then, you have the revolutionaries who've been really successful. On the other hand, you have the government that doesn't support the revolution. The government, of course, is made up of many, bourgeois factory owners, for instance, whose interest is not with the revolution. And the Communist Party, who it says it disagrees on the revolution because of ideological difference. It says it disagrees with the revolution on an ideological basis, but I'm not convinced this ideological basis was incredibly strong. I think it had much more to do with a man called Joseph Stalin, right? So it's complicated, but in August 1936, Britain and France agree that they don't want to get involved in the Spanish Civil War. They know that fascism is on the rise across Europe, but they don't want to antagonize Hitler because they're really afraid of a bigger, wider war that involves all of Europe, which obviously they had to be afraid of. But what they also understandably feared is a working class revolution, the likes of which was beginning to form and become powerful in many parts of Republican Spain. They didn't want their working classes to get similar ideas. At the same time, Stalin knew that he needed Britain and France to support him against Hitler too. So Stalin can't back any revolution, or France and Britain won't back him. So in order to keep the imperialists happy, and because Stalinists aren't exactly revolutionaries, in Spain, they team up with the Republican government to stop this revolution. And so begins the work of undoing the revolution. This counter-revolution begins. And they really don't like you calling it a counter-revolution, but that's really the only thing you can call it. And the revolution is undermined almost from the start, right? In October 1936, the government announces that people's militias are going to be disbanded, replaced by a popular army, basically to put the bourgeois officers back in control. And so that, groups like the POUM and CNT don't have too much actual physical armed power. And the next few months, we have heavy Republican losses. Malaga falls to the nationalists, and Guernica, as we all know, is brutally assaulted from the air in April 1937. Really dirty tactics are waged against the POUM. They're kicked out of the Popular Front. Most of their Central Committee members are arrested, and the Communist Party spreads the lie that they're Trotskyists collaborating with the nationalists. There's government repression, and this becomes more severe. The basis for treason becomes treason becomes kind of really widespread. Anyone is accused of treason, even workers organising for better living and working conditions. Meanwhile, living conditions in Barcelona are getting worse and worse. And by May, we have the May Days, where this violence on workers by the government, supported by the Communist Party, just becomes, reaches new heights, and things get incredibly dark and violent. So this is May 1937. At this point, Barcelona is still controlled by the CNT, which has also joined the Catalan government. I forgot to mention Catalonia has its own government. But it's, there's awful, horrific violence, basically, meted out on workers by the communists and the government. And I don't have time to go into loads of detail about this, but it is truly shocking, right? Many revolutionaries are murdered in the POUM and the CNT. And often historical accounts kind of dismiss this violence as minor left-wing infighting. Anarchists and communists hate each other, they're always going to fight. But it's actually more than this. It's organised violence against revolutionaries. And my view, this is what basically lost the war for the Republic, and it's entirely avoidable, and it's deeply political. So the revolution is almost completely undone by the end of this. Even the collectivization of agriculture is undone. Wealthy landowners are invited to join the Communist Party. Right-wingers are invited back into government. And so from the start, basically, the Republican government makes huge mistakes in the waging of this war, political mistakes. The Navy, which is loyal to the Republic, was in a position to stop Franco from coming over the Strait of Gibraltar and landing in Spain, but instead of utilising the Navy, it's kind of sent away, and Franco makes the passage safely. And there's a variety of other strategic military mistakes that are made, which are, for instance, in the Basque Country, which is in Bilbao, it's incredibly industrial. It's owned by the workers, but the Republic doesn't do anything to turn it into an arms producer. All these factories that are almost as strong as in Barcelona. And in the Basque Country, when the fascists are knocking at the door, they're not allowed to destroy these factories that they've failed to turn into arms factories because of the government. They're not allowed to destroy them so that Franco can't use them, even though he's literally about to take over the city, because their capitalist owners are in the Republican government. They don't want to destroy the factories because they think they can capitulate to Franco and one day get their factories back. So there's a variety of fumbles, but I don't think they're just military blunders and fumbles. I think it's too much to just attribute them to poor strategy or incompetence, or to lean too heavily on the idea, as some historians do, that it was just the lack of aid from abroad that led to the Republic's fall. It's political decisions that lie behind these military decisions, like disbanding the militias, failing to support the POUM and CNT militias fighting the fascists on their own, allowing the Basque capitalists to keep their factories intact. These, I think, are the downfall of the Republic. It's the crushing of the workers that allows the advent of Franco and Francoism. I think had the revolution been allowed to survive, Franco would have had a far more difficult time beating his opponents. And we see this in a number of examples where, had the workers stayed in control, they would have been able to stop Franco from making serious inroads. And I hope now, I think I've made it in time. I'm hoping now we can have a discussion and maybe dive more into the politics behind the Spanish Civil War, and discuss what we can learn about it, what we can say about it. And crucially, it's a crucially important moment for revolutionaries all over the world, even today. So yeah, I'll leave it there.